The alien warrior stood at the center of the shattered concourse, motionless as a statue carved from black iron. Around him, the remnants of the space station drifted in slow, silent spirals, twisted metal, flickering light panels, and the occasional frozen body of a crew member who had not been fast enough to flee. Emergency lights pulsed red across the curved walls, painting his armored form in a rhythm that matched the station's dying heartbeat. His name, translated roughly into human language, was Crothuan of the Vekari clans, and he had come here to end a war. The Vekari were renowned across the spiral arm as living weapons. Towering, four-armed, and encased in bioforged armor bonded to their nervous systems, they were sent into conflicts when diplomacy had failed and annihilation was deemed acceptable collateral. Crothuan had never known defeat. Entire species had surrendered at the sight of his kind descending from orbit like falling gods. This station, Horizon's Reach, was humanity's last defensive outpost in the Terrali system. Intelligence said it housed a prototype weapon capable of disrupting Vekari neural armor bonds. High Command had given Crothuan a single directive: secure the weapon, eliminate resistance, leave nothing intact. Resistance, however, had been minimal. Too minimal. Crothuan's segmented helm tilted slightly as his sensors swept the concourse again. Life signs were faint but present. One human, wounded, hiding behind a collapsed bulkhead. The warrior's combat instincts flared. His upper arms flexed, energy blades humming to life with a sound like distant thunder. He stepped forward, each footfall denting the deck plating. Human, his translator boomed, echoing through the broken hull. Your station has fallen. Surrender, and your death will be painless. There was no immediate reply, only the hiss of ruptured conduits and the distant groan of a station tearing itself apart. Then, weak but steady, a voice answered.
No.
Crothuan paused. The human emerged slowly from cover. He was smaller than Crothuan by more than half, clad in a torn flight suit darkened with blood along one side. His left arm hung uselessly, and he leaned heavily on a bent support beam to stay upright. Yet his eyes, blue, focused, and defiant, never left the alien warrior. You don't get to decide that, the human said. Not today. Crothuan felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Curiosity, perhaps, or irritation. Humans were supposed to beg. They always begged. Your species is illogical, Crothuan replied. You cannot win. You cannot escape. The human exhaled, a sound that was almost a laugh.
Yeah.
Heard that before. Crothuan raised his blades. The station trembled as if sensing what was about to happen. And then the human said something that stopped him cold. Before you kill me, the human said, voice tightening, I want you to see who you're murdering. Not a target. Not an obstacle. A person. Crothuan hesitated. Among the Vekari, identity and worth were bound to armor. From the moment of maturation, a warrior's bioarmor fused to flesh and mind, suppressing pain, fear, and doubt. To remove it in the presence of an enemy was unthinkable, a ritual reserved only for death rites or sacred trust. Yet Crothuan's sensors were detecting anomalies. The human's neural patterns were erratic but resolute, not driven by aggression, not even hatred. Why? Crothuan demanded. The human swallowed. Because if you're going to end us, I want you to know us. Silence stretched between them, broken only by distant explosions as automated defenses finally failed. Against every doctrine he had ever known, Crothuan reached up with one massive hand and disengaged the primary armor seals. The concourse filled with a deep, resonant hiss as the black plating unfolded and retracted, peeling away like the petals of a mechanical flower. Energy fields collapsed. Weapons powered down. The imposing silhouette diminished as layers of war were stripped away. Beneath the armor was not a monster. Crothuan's true form was leaner, his hide a muted slate gray marked with ceremonial scars. His eyes, once glowing with targeting data, were now dull amber, organic and unshielded. His breathing became visible, chest rising and falling heavily. For the first time in his life, he felt the cold. The human stared, shock briefly overwhelming his pain. You're not a god? Crothuan finished quietly.
No.
The warrior felt things flooding back. Sensation, memory, grief. The armor had always muted these, allowed him to function as a perfect instrument. Without it, the weight of centuries of violence pressed down on him all at once. You're risking everything, the human said. Why? Crothuan considered the question. Because you asked, he replied. And because I wish to remember what it is to choose. The station lurched violently, throwing both of them off balance. Warning klaxons wailed as the core went critical. We're out of time, the human said, coughing. Your fleet will glass this place once the station goes. Yes, Crothuan said. That was the plan. The human met his gaze. Then change it. Crothuan looked down at his own unarmored hands, hands that had ended millions of lives. For the first time, they trembled. What would you have me do? He asked. Help me transmit the data, the human said. Not a weapon. Proof. Proof that your armor suppresses free will, that your high command turns your people into tools. Crothuan's mind raced. Such data existed, buried deep within his own neural interface. It was forbidden knowledge, revolutionary. If I do this, Crothuan said slowly, I will be hunted, branded a traitor. The human gave a faint, grim smile. Welcome to the club. Together, they moved, an alien warrior and a wounded human, toward the command console. Crothuan interfaced directly, raw nerves screaming as unfiltered data poured out of him and into the station's long-range transmitter. The signal burst free just as the station's core ruptured. Light consumed the concourse. Crothuan awoke to silence. He lay amid twisted wreckage on the surface of a nearby moon, his body shielded by the remains of his own armor, which had reflexively reassembled around him during the blast. The human lay beside him, unconscious but alive, protected in the same way. Above them, the stars were filled not with Valkyrie warships, but with chaos. Valkyrie vessels were retreating, arguing, breaking formation. Across subspace channels, Crothuan heard it. Confusion, fear, awakening. Warriors were removing their armor. Commanders were losing control. The truth was spreading. Days later, as human rescue ships arrived, Crothuan stood unarmed at the edge of a temporary camp. He had removed his armor again, this time without hesitation. The human, Captain Elias Mercer, approached, arm in a sling, expression wary but respectful. So, Mercer said, what happens now? Crothuan looked toward the stars, where a war was ending not with fire, but with understanding. Now, he said, my people must learn to live without chains. Mercer nodded. That's usually the hard part. Crothuan turned to him. Your species defied us without matching our strength. You fought with will, with choice. Mercer shrugged. That's kind of our thing. For the first time in his long, violent life, Crothuan felt something that had nothing to do with conquest. Hope. And across the galaxy, countless armored figures were making the same choice, removing their armor and discovering what it truly meant to be alive. The war did not end in a single day, nor did peace arrive with triumphant declarations or celebratory parades. It ended quietly, in fragments, On isolated ships where Vekari warriors stood trembling as they disengaged armor that had defined their existence since birth, on command decks where officers suddenly found their orders questioned, and on distant worlds where long-subjugated species watched the sky and realized the bombardment was not coming. Crothuan became a symbol without intending to. Images of him standing unarmored beside a human captain spread through the networks of dozens of civilizations. To some Vekari, he was a traitor who had shattered sacred tradition. To others, he was the first to prove that the armor was not their soul, but their cage. For humanity, the revelation changed everything. They had not defeated the Vekari through superior firepower or cunning strategy. They had won by doing something no species had dared before, treating the galaxy's most feared warriors as people capable of choice. Weeks later, on a neutral world hastily converted into a diplomatic ground, Crothuan stood once more beneath open skies. He wore no armor now, only a simple ceremonial sash marking him as unbound. Across from him stood Captain Elias Mercer, cleared for duty, scars still healing. "You know," Mercer said, watching Vekari and humans mingle uneasily nearby, "back on that station, I didn't think we'd live long enough to see this." "Nor did I," Crothuan replied. "But you reminded me of something my people had forgotten, that strength without choice is not strength at all." Mercer extended his good hand. After a moment's hesitation, Crothuan took it carefully, the grip unfamiliar but steady. Across the galaxy, the age of unstoppable alien conquerors came to an end, not because they were destroyed, but because they chose to stop. And long after the last warship powered down its weapons, history would remember the moment everything changed. Not when the alien warrior raised his blade, but when he removed his armor and finally decided who he wanted to be.